First, I have a question, but first off, is that your book on the table, or
Sorry, can you say that
is
loud?
is that your book on the table?
Is my what?
Is that your book on the table?
It's mine in the sense that I own it.
I just wanted to.
This book was written by Massimo
Yeah.
Tigolucci. I'm probably butchering that name, it's Italian. But it's called Nonsense on Stilts. There are fish on stilts walking around. And it's kind of the source material for this discourse. And basically in this book he discusses things like falsification, Kuhn's, post-positivism, logical positivism. He gives practical examples and tips on how to tell science from non-science, and things like that. So yes, this is a great book to get and read. It's layman friendly. It's not like a research paper. It's great. So yeah, definitely a good primer. Is that what you're asking about?
Well, that wasn't my question. I just want to give a quick plug.
Okay.
That's like my favorite.
Yeah, I was going to point it out, but thank you for reminding me. I might have forgotten. The gentleman in the brown.
Oh, I still had a question.
Oh, you still have a question? Go ahead.
Anyway, my question dealt with kind of a common response to when you talk about science and everything. A common response is that all science in the past has been shown to be wrong, and every scientific theory that exists right now will probably be wrong. And I wanted to get your opinion on this, but what I kind of notice about this is that it seems to be that science is always wrong, but it's always in one direction. Like for instance, when you talk about take the Newton example with the planets. Well, okay, Newton was wrong, but it didn't turn out that the correct theory was the Earth was the center of the universe. It turned out to be something arguably even farther than that, to a certain degree or another. So I mean, it might be wrong, but it kind of really never regresses to. I mean, it mostly goes in one direction. I mean, that's my kind of my own personal hypothesis. Or I don't know if that's completely true. I haven't studied the history of science, but I was wondering if I could get your opinion on that.
Are you saying that the resolution tends to increase?
Yeah, it essentially tends to go away from what it originally was.
I mean, the Aristotle model for the planets, it was very inaccurate, but it did show that the planets move around a bit, but then models just improve every time. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, every scientific theory ever made will always be wrong. Science cannot generate truth. That doesn't bother me, because that's the only position humans have. Humans don't have access to the truth. I believe truth exists, I just don't think we have access to it. The fundamental nature of reality exists. It's just very difficult to describe. What we have is probabilities. I don't have a problem that all science will be wrong in a philosophical sense. Wrong in the same way that saying that a bachelor is not male or not single. All bachelors are funded by definition. All bachelors are male and single. It's the definition of a word. You could probably write a research paper in philosophy on it. But I would simply say that it's okay that science is wrong. That's kind of the point. I mean, that's where the part of the realist anti-realist debate sort of comes in, and the anti-realists are like, see, it's always wrong. Even when we're more and more right, like for example from Newtonian to shifting to general relativity, that shift sure became more accurate, but there are examples of very terrible false starts in science. Can't think of one at the moment, but where a huge line of reasoning was pursued for a very long time that was thought to be promising, and it just broke due to because it was completely wrong, and very nothing good came of it. That has happened, sure, sometimes, and that's like where the anti-realists argue. The pessimistic meta-induction comes in, is that it is inductively showable that practical induction in science always results in being wrong. Therefore, the induction that we have is just practical utility rather than actual approximations over reality. And people like argue, if you want to, a theist who wants to argue against science, even though for some reason, I would simply say that that's the point of science. If you're an atheist and interested in science, you submit yourself to the proposition that we cannot know ultimate kind of truths. That experience that we have, all experience is human experience. Humans exist inside of reality, our senses are limited, our cranial capacity is limited, all of our knowledge is nothing more than probability. It's just, it's an honest, you're honestly conceding to the nature of your existence, really. That's what I would say. I'm the one trying to understand the nature of my existence. You're the one trying to claim that you have an imaginary friend.
I often say something, I'm sort of an asshole. I'm sorry. Some of you I know this, but something similar to.
I'm very familiar with this.
Yeah, you're very familiar. So you're telling me that because we've been wrong in the past, that we're always going to be wrong, but what your knowledge is you're wrong, but you just keep saying the same thing. We say we're wrong, but we're working towards better and better answers all the time. But you're happy in your ignorance. I'm unhappy in my ignorance, and that's why I'm a scientist. Trying to continually get better at it. But then people get mad. That's okay.
Yeah, I kind of like agree. Like, if my first induction was just that I thought that all swans were black, but then I saw 1,000 white swans, and I go and I try and falsify that, and I find a gray swan. I don't go back to all swans are black. I create a new theory. It's not that we go from, oh, that's wrong, okay, so let's take a step back. We create a new theory based on that new information. It's not that, we regress back. We're like, oh, that's wrong, I'm going to start all over, back to square one. We are constantly building and improving. And that would be the, argument that sort of one.
Chas?
You know that many heuristics derived from philosophy of science that are used elsewhere, like in history?
Can you do that again?
Have you seen any methods like the Bayesian? Have you seen it used outside of science or hard sciences?
Yes, I've heard of it being used in the Bayesian probability can be used in any situation where you have pieces of data and a way to rate your confidence in that data. The example David gave was if you've seen 1,000 swans, the total swan population is 2,000. You have, I don't know what the actual equation would result, but you might have a 40 or 50% confidence rating that the swan population is going to be. The rest of the swan population will be white, and you can apply that to history and to any sociology, statistics. I'm sure it's used in elections. I know it's used in stock markets. It's used in medicine. You can use it in your daily life. You can use it in your own finances. You can use it to predict your grades and your fellow students' grades for each semester. Anything where there's data and you can approximate the whole body and do that over the known data. You can get yourself confidence rating about it.
We don't have to stop by any means, but I just have to take it.
Okay.
Well, I actually gladly invite people espousing the supernatural hypothesis. I'm trying. People espousing what I call the supernatural hypothesis, and I think your introduction of the term Bayesian meta-analysis applies very well here because, I look at religious beliefs, a great many religious beliefs, they're based on the supernatural agency as early science. In its day, before we had the math and the ability to understand chemistry and physics and whatnot, it was the best people could come up with between fighting off the predators and growing something, raising their flocks. And but when you look at the history of that we have available to us, supernatural has been wrong about practically everything that science has been able to shine the searchlight on. So, for instance, it's wrong about earthquakes and weather and planetary motion and everything else. And it's just like I view, my confidence in whether or not I should adopt any sort of supernatural belief on that basis. It's just like, you guys have been wrong about everything. Now we're down to the stuff that's in the brain, and we don't understand it yet, but you guys have been wrong about everything we've been able to figure out so far. It's like that's where my confidence comes from in saying I wish there was a warm fuzzy God that would protect me, but
demarcation line between what is natural or science and what is supernatural not simply defined by science as we progress. I mean, as you said, early attempts to understand things may have led to the idea that this is sort of a personal entity, a volcano. But now that's supernatural because we've learned enough about the world to understand that's outside of the natural phenomenon that we've been able to observe. But things that are supernatural, we wouldn't say something's supernatural if it's beyond our current ability to understand it. In the future, something that we look at today may be considered supernatural, but now we may not be able to make that distinction.
Right. It'd be really hard to try to test any kind of supernatural claim by natural means. So it's impossible to test the supernatural. Because once you end up finding a way to test the supernatural, now it's natural, not supernatural.
Exactly. So something supernatural, it's beyond, it's either beyond our current means to test or has been not found in our current means to test.
Only if it's not. Right, to restate what Red said, if you define reality in nature as all that actually exists, and spirits and gods exist, and they can be called upon and invoked in a consistent, repeatable manner, they are part of that reality and part of that nature, and something to be researched and studied, that kind of a thing. If you have a hypothesis that hurricanes are caused by the death of an angel, you could follow the formation of a hurricane consistently and notice that its formation is consistent with certain kinds of physical principles, and no angel showed up. I mean, that would be an example of a way to falsify that. If you, right, that's what you were just saying. If it exists, it can be tested. Well, I mean, if it exists and can be invoked consistently, it's under the domain of research. Question?
Yeah. How often does the argument of compounding probabilities come up? Like, if you say that all science is based off very priori assumptions, then how can you take anything as true if the probability just compounds that you're wrong? Like, because you say like you can do something with a certain percent of confidence, but that's based off of your assumption, or that's based off of your observations, which themselves have built-in error. Does that argument ever come up, or like how often is that brought up?
I am not well read enough to be able to answer that question. Basically, the question was, if I understood it correctly, was what about compounding error, compounding probability? Like, say you have a confidence rating in something, and maybe in some aspect of cellular nature, and you do something based on that assumption of that confidence rating. What do you do about the probability errors below that? I actually don't know enough to properly answer that question.
That's why we don't just look at something once.
Right.
That's why meta-analyses are so important, because they tease out, they get rid of that compounding problem. So I'm 95% confident that in this study, and I'm 90% confident in that study. And then what you do is you take all of that data together, and all of a sudden that gives you a much, much larger set to draw from. And so that's why replication in science, repeated observation are so important. That actually shrinks down your error chances.
So yes, the problem does exist. People are aware of it, and they do meta-analysis to try to minimize the risks associated with compounding error, I guess.
Particularly with random error fluctuation of data.
The gentleman in the background.
Yeah, one of the things I've been wanting to mention is that whenever people go on about Christianity, one of the things I always like to mention is the Epic of Gilgamesh, because it predates any known work of the Bible by 800 years. In this story, it mentions a garden of the gods where man is made from clay. In part of the story, it mentions a snake stealing the plant of immortality. There is a giant flood that's anticipated. A god tells a man about this flood, instructs him to build a boat in preparation for the flood. He lands the boat on a mountain and releases 3 birds before deciding to leave the boat. So I think that's one of the best counterpoints to religion, because it shows that the Bible isn't really original, and it's a single story that's
I get that all the Egyptian Book of the Dead is another, if you look at Horus and all these guys, and every time, we get back to the non-fossil viability of things, where the argument that I get literally every single time is that those are there to test our faith. And then at that point, literally, without fail, every time, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, if you look at Horus, who, walked on water, was the Lamb, the way, the truth, the light, he was a lion, he was a shepherd, he was raised after 3 days, and they're like, well, he was sent here to test our faith by the devil.
I just tell people that I'm here to test your faith.
Going back to his point. Going back to his point, Christianity borrows from so many different prior religions and theories and all these kinds of things. You don't think Easter is really when Jesus raised from the dead, or Christmas is his birthday. No, those were pagan holidays that were convenient to facilitate that transition from these other religions to Christianity.
Plagiarism by anticipation.
Did you have a question or
I
comment?
just wonder what you would say in regards to the person who says you shouldn't have higher confidence in, say, the scientific method as opposed to any other method, say like Paul Feyerabend, who's critical of science.
Yeah, what, did you mention another method?
Well, no, or any other method, like divination or any pseudoscience.
I think
Science is inductively evident that science produces useful results. I would simply, that kind of criticism, I would say the reason I have confidence in it is the same reason I have confidence that my favorite apple pie tastes good, because each time I eat it, it tastes good. It gives me, there's a certain level of a history with it, and science has a kind of a history that gives you that kind of confidence.
Basically experience is what you're talking about.
And I can falsify, I can show that, I have a potential to prove certain things wrong. I can find out where I can feel out the edges of the results, so to speak. The data space where some experimental results exist, I can feel out where the limits of that edge is. Whereas with something like, say, divination or seances or astrology, there's no way to figure out in a reliable way where the edges of the data points are. With astrology as an example, you can take the descriptions of all the different signs of the zodiac and all the different combinations, and you can give those descriptions to the wrong people, and the majority of people will say those descriptions apply to them. And you can swap that up any number of times, and you'll get the same result. This applies to you. Which is why there's no way to demonstrate that it's false. It's not even conceivably false. So basically, the science is, if it's not conceivably false, then there's no way. It's not a question of science. It's just astrology. It's voodoo. It's myth. It's a peak unicorn.
So falsifiability remains the demarcation that you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, according to Karl Popper, anyways.
I would just add that the big difference between science and other forms of knowing is that science is done and built in such a way as to prevent us from fooling ourselves. These others are not. So astrology, for example, you go and you open up, I don't know, Red Book or the Oklahoman or wherever it is that has those now, or you go to astrology.com, and they're meaningless pieces of information that can apply to anyone. And so with astrology, for example, we've done very well-controlled experiments, just like he was talking about, and shown that these don't actually apply, which is very different from scientific models of personality. Where if I give you a scientific, test of, for example, the big 5 personality factors, and then I give one over there to Bryce, and you guys have very different results, and I give you his results and your results, you're going to go, this is not me. But that's not what you're going to do with the broad general statements of astrology. And so you're actually, in science, you're doing your best to prevent yourself from fooling yourself and from relying on information that turns out is actually not accurate. The other forms of quote-unquote knowledge and knowing don't do that. They rely instead on you not looking to see if you're being inaccurate.
Well, it's like the Bible. One of my favorite verses is "Thou shalt not test God." Isn't it something like that in there? There's, no, maybe I'm.
It's not very The beautiful thing about science, though, is that it's kind of based upon kind of a capitalism type thing, in the sense that if you are correct in your scientific method, you can win money, and everybody wants to have this kind of money, coming from Nobel Prizes. So it produces this best known truth, even though it could be very falsifiable. There's people out there constantly looking to falsify the claims of any kind of scientific claim. It doesn't matter what it is. If there's a Nobel Prize for it, there's somebody that's out there actively trying to disprove that. And that's the great thing about it, is that things that are proved through science, our best truths through science, have been in place because they haven't found anything to falsify. But that's the great thing about it, is that it keeps us from fooling ourselves. People are constantly trying to find ways to go against what we already know, and if they can't do it, then it makes it much more of a truth, where religion doesn't offer that type of error checking. It's just, it provides the answers, don't question it. Where science is like, fine, question me, make me lose my Nobel Prize. So that's where my faith in that comes from, for lack of a better term.
Just to quickly mention, if you're interested in philosophy and are challenged by, at least I know I am, challenged by like some of the more modern fundamental stuff, especially some research papers that are really dense and hard to get into. There's this podcast, it's called The History of Philosophy from Start to Finish Without Any Gaps. And I highly recommend it. I think I'm on episode 50 or something. And Aristotle's still my favorite philosopher, because the things he came up with are extremely fundamental and pretty